Thanks for tuning in to the Interactive Indies podcast. If this is your first time listening, Interactive Indies is a bi-weekly community podcast featuring different and all kinds of diverse and creative people in the game development, interactive, and other creative communities in Winnipeg and also across Canada, I suppose, now too. I just talked to someone from Edmonton. You can also listen or watch, rather, the podcast on YouTube. So you just got to search for Interactive Indies and maybe subscribe if you're interested in what you see or what you hear. But to jump right into it, I have a particularly special guest, although I do say that to everyone in some capacity. But I actually do mean that because Lesley Klassen, one of the first group of people that I interacted with locally here in Winnipeg in the community, in terms of like, this is maybe a heavy word to use or whatever, but like I would consider you someone of a mentor in terms of me kind of growing in the industry and growing in the community. Thanks for being here, I guess.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for all the kind words.
So, I guess to give it a little bit of context in more detail, the first time that kind of we had interacted with one another, I suppose, is like I had started volunteering in the community, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. And then you had asked me to join IGDA, I believe?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it was a little bit before that. I think it was at a game jam, possibly.
Yeah. Oh, I remember Party Sketch.
That's
another thing.
Party Sketch. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
That's where we think we really first crossed paths, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. And then.
Or were you at the game jam that was ACI that was both floors?
I was at one earlier. I guess one of the early ones that Dylan did. Maybe the first one that Dylan did, where there was like food. There was food and things going on, and it was awesome. It was cool.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. I mean, I forget even what I had made. Anyway, nonetheless, it was many moons ago, and yeah, I was working to do some volunteer work with IGDA and trying to run that thing, and realized I needed help because running a community is a lot of work, and actually realized that you were much more suited to run community things than myself. So it just made a lot more sense to kind of bring you on board and eventually hand it off because you are into like lots of the community stuff, and I know I know how hard it is even to like run a Discord server, and like, it's like I have blitzes of energy to participate in the community, and then every once in a while I'm just like, I just don't want to, I'm like kind of hermit. So I appreciated the fact that you were fully in there, and you wanted to do stuff.
Right. Yeah. But I'm kind of interested where your start was. So we talked about kind of how I joined there, but where did your kind of integration start?
When did I start kind of?
Yeah.
Well, actually, so I used to be an interactive director for like a long time at an adult education company, and I actually met another co-founder of Flipside, John Luxford, at a party at the time, and we were working together on some projects, and suddenly we were like, hey, let's start a business. And then we started a business, and we met somebody named Kevin Natchuk way back when.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Okay. So the company was called Dojo Learning.
Dojo Learning?
Yeah. So that's my first entry into digital media, Dojo Learning.
Okay. And
then that thing didn't do anything. We just did. We had no idea we didn't even know how to run a company. Like Lux actually knew how to run a company. I had no idea how to run a company.
I love how honest you are when you say that.
Yeah, it's true.
It's refreshing.
It's true. And then, but we both didn't know how to run a software as a service company, and so this thing actually we ended up selling the tech to some company out of the UK.
Seems like a big step, kind of.
Well, we just sold the tech and we didn't make nearly enough money, but we sold it. So then like Checkbox made something that sold. Yeah. And then actually after that, I kind of went back to working as an interactive director until finally I decided that I wanted to go out and do my own stuff. Mm-hmm. And along the way, virtual reality became really important to me. And then I had an early virtual reality experience that I was making on my own project, which was like trying to recreate a lake that my dad camps at every year.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I was recreating this thing. It was called Starry Lake. And I was getting into like recreating a moment, a memory basically. And I didn't realize I was doing that. But while I was making that, I had this crazy nostalgic moment. This crazy weird VR-induced nostalgia moment. Okay. Where I was like, what the heck? How's this possible?
Sorry, what's that? Was that? Oh.
Yeah.
She's just pointing.
All right.
I know doing.
Woohoo!
So you're having
so I was having this weird VR kind of nostalgia-induced moment that VR created, and then I was like, oh my god, this is the craziest medium on the planet. Like, it's amazing.
Was that a big kind of moment for you where
huge
kind of set things in a different direction?
Yeah. Like, before I was kind of struggling to figure out, like, I also directed. So I was interactive director for a long time, mm-hmm. and I also was a video director for a long time, and I used to do like lots of, like, I was known as like the training guy, so I wrote all these training things for all these companies, and I learned all this stuff around adult education, but something was missing. You know, I just didn't feel like something more interesting. I never really could figure it out. And then when I had that moment with virtual reality, it was like, oh, that was the interesting thing. And then I had no idea how to do anything. And then I went to a talk that Noah did, and he was doing IGDA. And I remember coming up to him afterwards and like, how do you start a company like this? You know, and he's like, he turns to me, he's like, Flash, you can do it. So you can just do it. And so it kind of then my orbit got back into Lux and Rachel. And Rachel I met way back when, who's the other co-founder of Flipside. She worked at the same adult education company, and John did. So we have this history that kind of we've woven together for like more than 13 years. And then I realized when I realized that I could never start a company on my own because I knew the mistakes I made in the past, and I needed other people who had skills that I didn't have. And so it was really important to find people that had skills that I didn't have. And
so that's kind of that's how things led to IGDA specifically.
How they led to IGDA specifically through all those interaction points along the way, even how our company started. Before our company started, there were some game jams in between. There were some meetings with Louis, the current executive director at New Media. Just all these little points and bumps along the way, and suddenly I realized that I was actually finding my community, right?
Right.
And then once you find your community, you're like, oh, this is my community. I understand I'm into this kind of interactive art and creation. Then game jams started happening, and then IGDA started happening. And so that it really is just kind of like an exploration and along the way that kind of brought me there. I'm a little long-winded, but yes, so that's how we got there.
And you were doing that with Corey at the time? Like when you were doing IGDA, was it just you or was it you and Corey?
It was myself, Steve, and I should remember his last name because...
Steve Payne?
No. He's moved away now. He was a great technical artist that moved.
His last name start with an O?
I'd have to go through I'm so bad with names, so I'd have to go through my email. But I actually was doing it with three people at the time, and yeah.
Okay. Excuse me. So another thing I'm kind of curious about, let me collect my thoughts, was even like kind of before all these things. So you started at this company and you sold it, but how did you kind of get to that point? So like in terms of learning or education, how did you kind of first break into that to begin with? Was it like self-taught or?
Okay. I took some computer programming at the University of Winnipeg. I didn't finish it, but I took C programming and a little bit of C++. And then I had an arts degree in business, so I did a degree. And then I got into the photography club at the University of Winnipeg, and I started getting into photography. So I started taking film and developing black and white film and loading my film camera manually and going around. And then I got into becoming a photo editor at the newspaper. I did a project where I spent some time traveling overseas, taking photographs in an international development project in Malawi, Africa, when I was at that time. So I got to do all these various kind of experiential stuff, and then I kind of just started asking myself what's the things I liked, and then I started to do more of that, and that kind of just led into all these different kind of meeting different people who open different doors for you along the way. Or like a good friend of mine, for example, looked at my photographs, and I never thought much of my photographs, and she looked at my photographs and said, "Hey, you're actually a really good photographer." And then so that helped me understand my skills. So it's all these different people who've just helped me see the skills, and then my own personal crazy curiosity, and then and I go in and just explore stuff. So that's kind of how I do things.
Cool. How important do you think like things are? You mentioned photography that are completely outside of the thing that you do as your profession. Because my inclination is to say like if you kind of have to maybe put all of your energy towards something to kind of push it forward, but like for your kind of mental health and your mental well-being, I feel like some of these things are important. So I don't know, like I'm curious what your perspective is on like balancing the workload and the industry and things like that with your mental health.
Well, for me, I have a lot of opinions about mental health. One of the first things is knowing your own limits. So knowing, for example, if you push yourself too hard, and your mental health starts deteriorating, then you're actually doing worse off for your friends, colleagues, companies, your career, right? So there's a point where people are like, work, and there's a point where you cross a threshold and you're like, well, am I really moving the thing forward that I'm trying to move forward? Am I giving myself the mental space to come up with better, more creative solutions to things? So for me, for example, I'm learning how to play music. My brother is a musician. He has taught me how to play the synthesizer and keyboard a little bit, and now I'm learning to do music because it's teaching my brain musical math. Well, how great is it to know that, Or photography, you start realizing all the rules of composition. A lot of the rules of composition in photography are actually rules that help you make more depth in a photograph, and you actually can take all those things and apply them to something like virtual reality, which uses depth as a significant way of crafting experiences. So like leading lines of parallel. So like there's some direct correlation stuff, right? And also just like having ways to just, I don't know, I'm a playful person, so I like to play a lot. So being playful, like if it's drawing or sketching or learning something, like all that stuff has to happen. If it doesn't happen, at least for me, then I don't have a crisp enough mind to make good decisions. So I go to bed early now. Like I go to bed at like 10 p.m. and I get up at like 6, and I get to work early because that's the time when my brain's fresh.
Okay, yeah.
And I just get things out of my mind there because I know as the day goes on, I have like a bit of a scattered kind of brain, and I know like, okay, I can harness my energy in the morning a certain way. And anyway, it's just about knowing yourself and knowing your boundaries, and I think everyone's different. And I'm starting to get more critical now. I'm learning a lot from both my co-founders, actually, that that everyone is different and you have to have a fresh mind. And if you all keep moving forward together, you're going to succeed at the things that you're trying to do. You will do it will happen, right? So rather than live in the fear of like, I got to work and make it happen. Well, how many people do you burn along the way? How many bridges do you burn? How many relationships die? You know, like all that comes from overwork, you know, and then I meet people and I've met lots of founders who just, you come out of a failed moment and then your self-worth feels like it's 2 inches and you're crawling out of this like deep hole of like failure. And I'm like, well, we can't stay feeling like that for long periods of time. Our health gets affected. So I have been much more focused on how to make a more balanced life. And the reason why I'm talking about it a lot is that I'm doing some research right now, and like founders of companies are like, I think 3 times more likely to commit suicide.
I see how stressful it can be for people in a position where the company is relying on them. Like there's employees, you know, that are paying their rent, that are dependent on you, like delivering, you know, projects, clients, contracts. And sometimes I think of how stressful it is for me, but how many multiplications of that it is for the people that are, you know, responsible for everything. So I can't say that I understand what that's like, but I feel like I can appreciate maybe.
I think truthfully, if you work in a job where it's a hectic job and you're working and pushing and working every day, then you probably understand essentially kind of the level of workload. I think that's reasonable. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would say that it bleeds out into the weekends and it bleeds out into the evenings and it does a bunch of things that maybe it wouldn't necessarily if you were an employee. But I think if an employee that's working hard, they do understand basically the workload. The challenge I find is that you have to be thinking about the company in a very big level, mm-hmm. but then you have to also look at the tiny problems and all that kind of stuff. It really kind of it makes you switch perspectives and gears often in a day, and so all that context switching is the thing that's been, you know, for me more challenging.
So do you use some of the same things that you were mentioning before, like that like balance your mental health with the like stress when you talked about founders are more likely to commit suicide? Are those some of the things that you can use to kind of balance that, or is that like a different kind of thing? It seems like it might be a little different, possibly.
Well, actually, why I say that, and I don't mean just founders, like people who own companies, people who take a lot of risk in their life, right? And I guess what I'm trying to say more so is, so part of growing and making our company happen is our whole team like came together to really build out this awesome prototype of our app, and then we went down to live in San Mateo, California with an accelerator, and that accelerator is called Boost VC, and we lived in a university dorm at the time for 4 months, and then we worked on our company. And so my primary role there was to kind of lead that part of the business development side, and so so that would be like, you know, it's classic Silicon Valley, and you start understanding what it means. Like it's between San Francisco and San Jose, and there's a bunch of like towns and little cities along the way where all the big, you know, Apples and Googles and Facebooks are, and there's business happening, and there's a busy flow, and
it seems like that would only intensify some of that stress.
That's the thing. And so you're there for 4 months and you realize like this is the energy of Silicon Valley and this is the expectation of what it means to be an entrepreneur. And you kind of start realizing, I'm like, well, this actually is not going to do it for my brain. Not how my brain works. And I don't think a lot of people's brains, to be honest. I think that the pressure that investors put on their investees, their companies, is a lot. Not. I would say that our investors have been very awesome, and they've been very supportive. And however, we haven't invested the kind of money where there's like got investment for the kind of money where it gets into the crazies lands, right? Where you have 3, 5, 10, 20, 30 million dollars that someone invests in you, right?
Right.
So there's so much pressure, right? And so and I get it, because the money's someone's giving you money to do something, right?
Right.
But at the same time, I feel like that cultural experience that I had there taught me a lot about, that's not the kind of way I think that you need to live in order to build something. Because if that is the way I would have to live, then I couldn't do it.
I would give you credit for like recognizing that, because I feel like I'm not. So I'll say a caveat, like I don't understand kind of this part of the industry as well as I do the community side of it.
Yeah.
But my perception is that like people are so passionate about the things that they're passionate about that they'll kind of dive into something and not realize kind of what's happening to them. So it seems like you were able to take use that as like a learning experience and kind of realize like there might be an alternative way to do it.
Well, actually, I have to give, again, mostly credit to my co-founders on that one, because they were like a mirror. They were reflecting back. Like when you're inside of it, you don't even realize what's going on, but your co-founders can be like, kind of hold up the mirror to you and say, hey, like is this good? And at the same time, that whole process, like how would I say this? The idea of going down there to get money for our company, like, that wasn't for me an exciting idea around like this is going to be a lot of fun.
Right.
The fun part was meeting the other companies and other founders and realizing that you're all in it together, and like there's a camaraderie and you learn from each other, and that you realize that there's so many crazy smart people in the world, and that's the fun part. But the part where you realize that your goal is to make your company, position your company to get investment, that world is just a different world. And so for me, that wasn't fun. And my heart is in the community. My heart is in creating, right? And then along the way, there was a necessity to understand the structures of making a business, because we started making something that we believed in, right? Like as soon as you start believing in what you're making, it's like, it's not just an exercise. And like suddenly like, I believe in this thing we're making. Well, now you have to turn that into something, and so we decided to turn it into a business. And we all had to learn new things to do it. And so for me, that was my big learning is to like, what is it like to go down there and represent a company and try to fundraise and create partnerships and learn how to be a strategic business thinker. And then the truth is, when you come back, it's been more than a year now, I've like settled down a lot more and tried to relax more and learn from it. And now I've learned a ton of things.
You've brought it up multiple times, so I'm wondering how important, because I want to get into Flipside, but how important is that, like, kind of the team that you built to pursue that, like, that creative, passionate project? Just in kind of a general sense.
Most important thing. It's more important than anything. Like, it's not always peachy keen smiles, I'll argue with Rachel, or argue with Lux. Lux will argue with me. Rachel will push back. Lux and Rachel will poke once in a while, right? But that's because we all actually care about our part of the business. We're actually, in our tensions, are trying to stand for something. And then when we all realize that we're actually just standing for something, well, then it's amazing. Because when you're failing, you can fall back, and there's two people that collect you. Right? And then they can push you back up. And when someone else is failing, you can collect them, and you push them back up. And we have a kind of radical communication. We have something called Founders Coffee, and we sit down and we work things out if things aren't working.
Whether it's like a personal relationship.
Well, I mean, it's always a bit personal and about business. Like, I spend more time with both of my business partners than I do with my partner at home.
How? That's interesting. So how does that affect kind of different relationships, or is that how do you balance that?
I mean, that's pretty normal for every business owner.
Okay.
Most business owners spend more of their time at work than home, right? Just like most people spend more of their time at work than home if they have a 9-to-5 job.
Right.
So I spend my 9-to-5 with these two people more than I spend on a weekly basis. Always weekends I spend with my partner, of course, right? And evenings, of course, as well. But you're committing a significant amount of time. And sometimes you'll hear people who start businesses that say that their co-founders almost are like little kind of unions. and there's a reason why before you start you have these agreements that you sign together, and like if it goes wrong, this is what happens and that happens and stuff, because you don't want it to be about feelings at that point. You just want it to be about how you're going to do things. And then on the flip side, if you're on the other side, if you're not in dispute but you're in growth and success and you're working together, that communication has got to be as much of us saying, hey, when you do this, that bothers me, and we got to figure a way to do something differently, to as celebrating successes together and playing board games on Friday afternoons, or like, it's really crucial. It is the most important thing.
I think this is some of the things, like at the beginning when I was talking about kind of mentorship. I think that's some of the things that you had helped me understand better. Because my mentality was to just kind of do things and get them done, and I have no patience for red tape or process.
Yeah.
And I kind of, it's still there. It's not like that will ever go away.
Yeah.
But it makes sense why you would be saying that, because that's, I feel like, something that I had kind of learned from you, and I try and balance that. And I honestly think about that conversation pretty frequently when I'm dealing in situations where I have to be patient, and there's an external kind of force.
It's hard.
That I can't
control.
I can't go around it or control.
You can't go around. You can't control. Yeah. Like someone who has to be at the table, and they have to be there first before you can be there. And you're like, but I've been here for a week already in my head.
So I'm curious what advice you would give to kind of people like locally, because I think the industry has been here for a while, obviously, but I think my perception is at least that things are growing, and there's younger people, your younger companies that are kind of maybe are beginning to start thinking about like doing some of the things that you have done. So what advice would you give to those people to set them up for success?
All right, to set them up for all the success. And I guess this is something I wish I would have done early on too, and learned from this. But especially if you're young and you have an idea. So let's imagine we're talking about games, and then we'll go back and I'll talk about apps. But games, for example, you have an idea for a game. Really take it to heart that you want to make the smallest, tiniest part of that game first. That most important fun mechanic. The thing that you want to maybe, like, it could be the thing that brings the joy, and get to the joy part. The smallest morsel of it as possible. Don't put effort into the crazy worlds you're going to create and the millions of things you're going to do, and forget about that. Try to understand your game from the most tiniest little bit. And I don't know much about games, so take that for a grain of salt. On apps, the same kind of thing. I really do think that what you need to do is you need to understand fundamentally what you're doing, right? So that's a problem to understand. Like, what are you actually making, right? Mm-hmm. Are you making something that there's a million of and you want to make it a little bit better? Or are you making something that's completely original? So all these things, of course, if you're going to make companies, you got to make things, right? So a game or an app or something. So, and don't spend a lot of money if you don't have to. Like in the beginning, if you got like a buddy who can do like good 3D art and a buddy who's a programmer, and maybe another person who wants to do some writing, then chunk out a few weekends, jam out some ideas, share them with people. Don't get embarrassed. Everyone's work is shitty in the beginning. And the more you do that at the smaller level, that's why game jams are great. Game jams are little incubators for games, and they're incubators for apps. They're incubators for all sorts of things. So don't go in too crazy. Think really small.
Because I think you brought up a good point there. Depending on what kind of mindset you go into a jam with, you can kind of take bad habits out of that. So I think
exactly
the big thing is like crunch. I talked to Z when we were chatting about this. So I'm curious to know your perspective, because it's like jams are kind of inherently crunch.
They're just crunches.
What we're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
So how do you involve yourself in a jam without associating with the kind of negative aspects?
Okay, well, I think that there's a difference between executing an idea and like prototyping an idea. Okay, so I think that a game jam is part fun, right? People go in there because it's a fun thing to do. I'm going to lock myself in a room or with a group of people for long periods of time to work on an idea, and I'm going to use the energy from other people working.
I like that.
Right? To feel like we're connected together in this community to get through this adventure called this game jam.
I agree.
So that's the game jam. But then at the end of the game jam, if you really like what you're doing and you want to create that thing, well, that's about creating a sustainable flow to create. Because it's a lot better if you chip away every single day and create something than go, oh, I'm going to work, claps, I hate this, I never want to see this again. Will I even open up Unity again? Maybe not for maybe 3 months. Do I care about this project? Nah, maybe I'll just quit the project. You know what? Well, I'll try something new at the next game jam. So if you really care about it, you're not going to do that spike and fall, because that's like, that. It takes a long time to make a game. It takes a long time to make an app. It can take years. Mm-hmm. So if it takes years and you're really excited about something, then set yourself up. So if you're going to be a company and you want to make a game, you got to find either money from Canadian Media Fund, lots of people do, or you got to do service work, make money, feed yourself, or have a job part-time, find some way to sustain yourself. And eat food.
Ideally, yes.
Eating food is good.
So how do you bounce? Because I think I had this similar problem or issue when I was starting. Is like I wanted to be in the industry, but I didn't necessarily have a place at the time. I suppose I wasn't technically proficient at programming, technically proficient at art, which my understanding was at the time those are the two largest components. Is it important to kind of communicate to people that are trying to pursue this thing that, hey, life is as life does. You might not be able to do the thing that you're passionate, like balancing, pursue your passion at the expense of everything.
I understand. So one thing I've been thinking more about is maybe people's passions aren't what they actually think they are. So for example, if you are, if you're not a good artist and you continually make art and you try to make it outward, like you're trying to work on something and you're just not good at it, and it's okay because I'm not good at a ton of things, and most people aren't good at a ton of things. Somewhere along the way, it's like, well, then if that's a joy you have, then maybe that's a joy you work on your own until it reaches a level of quality that maybe you can bring it back and see if it's a commercial level. But if it's not working commercially, then you can't force it, right? But then I would ask yourself, why do we get hung up on certain kinds of things? Right? Like we get hung up, it's like, I got to be this kind of thing. And sometimes what it means is that you haven't tried enough things to find the thing that you may be more innately connected to.
Right.
So we get hung up on the thing, like, I want
to make video games.
I want to make video games because I love video games and video games. But maybe you're actually good at pottery. What if you're like a brilliant potterer? But you never let yourself...
Never tried? I've never
done never let yourself let go of this thing that you've got yourself into. You might be...
That's interesting. Because I feel like people they're giving up. I think if I were to go do pottery, I think to be honest, my perception would be like, oh, I'm giving up on the thing that I think that I care about.
Right. And sometimes what I'm saying is sometimes what you think you care about isn't grounded in the in your efforts of trying a bunch of things.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember one of my nieces or nephews, I forget who now, but I remember the story is like inside their head they thought they were like really amazing skateboarder. And I'm like, maybe what's inside your head isn't true, right? Mm-hmm. And that's something even for myself I have to like. It's like constantly. I think
It's hard to hear.
It's also hard to realize like when you're not as good as that you think you are, right? And like one thing I'm starting to really lean on more is people who are better than me, solving problems better than me, doing things better than me. It's great because it lets me kind of focus on the things that I'm finding that I'm good at, right? So what I'm saying is everyone can find things that they're good at. It may not be what your brain thinks you're good at. You might be something you might have to try. Mm-hmm. And then the thing that I like talk to a lot of young people when they're getting into like just getting into things, and it's like there's a period between 20 to 27-ish that zone. 27's on the later end of that zone. You can and you could go for the rest of your life if you want. I'm putting an arbitrary number on this, but I'm just saying if you're gonna like play with lower risk, it's a good time to play. Try as much stuff out as possible. Because until you try stuff out, you have no idea.
Someone told like a long time ago when I was more in that range.
Yeah.
Was they applied that to like relationships? They said
date as many people, right?
They said that you don't know what you like or what relationships work if you kind of just commit to one person.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that 27 is the top. I mean, like, I'm still taking risks and stuff, and I'm 42, right? Mm-hmm. Or 41, turning 42 in November, so 41. But like, so I don't want to make an arbitrary like line in the sand. But I'm just saying, there's this thing where you have more risk when you're younger than when you're older. So to try more things out.
So I also want to kind of get into Flipside itself, but like these things I'm more interested in, the kind of things that we've been talking about, because it's like personal and it's kind of like makes up who you are. Yeah. But you know, I'm pretty familiar with Campfire Union previously and now Flipside, but for people that maybe aren't familiar with, what is Flipside?
Okay, so it's a virtual reality, or it's a virtual television studio for cartoons. So basically we simulate a virtual reality television studio, cameras and teleprompters, sets, but you're a character. So you play a cartoon or a character and you make animated content, and you can do it live or you can do recordings. And people are doing some really cool things with it. So right now there's a company that they're actually a platform called Caffeine, and I want to talk about this, and I care about this, by the way, as much as I do personally, because I'll get to the roots of why I care.
Yeah, and
about
I was going to get in. That was going to be a byproduct.
Yeah, I want to get into the roots of why.
Yes,
okay? So,
very interesting.
So there's this customer we have. They're Caffeine Studios, and they're this. There's this like live streaming platform that you can chat with people who are like streaming games and things like that, kind of like other platforms like Twitch-ish kind of thing, right? But their thing is it's instantaneously fast. Like the lag is like almost zero. It's crazy fast, right? So you can just chat with someone and they get it back right away. So people are making like, there's this episode of this cartoon show called Live from the Eighth Dimension where it was a slumber party. So these cartoons live in these cartoon characters, Roach, Robot, Kyle, and Amy live in the ninth dimension on a space station, and they made a slumber party, and they were playing charades as cartoon characters with the audience that was watching at home, typing on the platform. So they would be like, the audience would be like, they'd ask for a suggestion, the audience would type it out. One of the characters would have, like the big cockroach character would grab this little slate that we created with them, or they actually started doing all this stuff now on their own, that lets you see in VR into the chat room, and you get a suggestion, and they started playing games. And so we're really getting excited about people making animated games, animated charades, animated game shows, and so basically we do like real-time cartoons, real-time animations, and Flipside lets you do it live, which is super exciting. So why should people care? Why do I care?
Yeah, I'm wondering how these other things we've talked about connect, the roots of it.
Yes, so for me, I also, as I said, when I was younger, I used to try a bunch of things. One of the things I tried out was improv theater. So I did 3 years of improv theater. I did about 70 shows. We did practices once a week. Learned all the rules of a game. There's sort of the framework of improvisation. There's long form improvisation and there's short form improvisation and there's games and all these things. And you learn all these techniques. And what you realize, so I have all this theater experience, right? And then I also did a lot of filmmaking. So I did we did shoots that had like dollies and jibs and steady cams and cruising casts and lighting people and mid carpenters building things, and I learned how to make film productions. I did that for a little while. And then when I got into interactive stuff, so we started getting into games, right? You started about the interactivity of things, right? So that's my background, right? And if you understand what virtual reality really is, virtual reality basically is this volume, okay? It's this area, okay? And we thought about this area, like we just brainstormed about what this area is, and we essentially saw this area as a stage. So I have stage experience called improv. So I understand stage, theater, position, acting, blocking actors, how to properly kind of move things around, right? I also did live television for CBC. I did live television for the Grey Cup and like hockey games and all that stuff, right? So then I understood, hey, we could build a simple little thing around this. And then, so once we understood that we were actually building a creation app, then we all got crazy into these ideas. Like, what if they could do charades? What if you could draw and we could create and broadcast it? And so what we were really doing is we were understanding the medium and then really look inside ourselves and what we actually believed in. And then we started building what we thought was the authoring tool of tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. And then we thought, hey, people are going to want to watch this stuff. Just like if you watch Conan O'Brien, there's a live studio audience. We can already do the talk show part.
That's a good, yeah.
Right, we can create the animated talk show part, but how can we get all the live people inside of there? And then we started thinking about that problem. And so we just started thinking about the big picture, and we discovered ourselves. And we discovered ourselves as we're a live, real-time animation company that has a vision for immersive broadcasting. So you make stuff live, and then we're thinking about how do you broadcast that live? Mm-hmm. And how do you create and break the barrier between the audience and the creator using VR? Because that's a magical thing that VR can do that you can't get on like YouTube or Twitch or these other platforms. You're stuck between the monitor, right? So this was a legitimate kind of bubbling up of internal understandings of ourselves and understanding the medium, and then making some weird, wacky decisions that we were going to build something. And then we realized that we didn't have any money, and then we went to Silicon Valley and went through that whole thing.
Because you mentioned you're building the platform of the future.
Yeah.
So, like, I have two questions there. Is like, one, how do you build the platform of the future in the present?
Right.
And two, what is the I guess that's a redundant question. I was going to say, what is the platform of the future, but you kind of...
Well, I'll just generalize it more. So, how do you know how to build the platform of the future in the present? Well, that's actually about studying the medium in the present. Like, what happens is a lot of people, they don't dissect VR enough to understand the fundamental principles. Okay, so for example, one thing that like Lux did really well is he really brought the kind of foundational ideas of what he thought all virtual reality platforms are going to require. Like, these are the 10 features that every major platform in virtual reality have to have. How did we get to that stuff? By studying virtual reality, right? And then the perspectives that Rachel and I brought were much more from like the content side. Like, how will the content need to be made? And how we understand the future is we studied the medium, right? And then we applied our historic understanding of like content, and then we made a ginormous prediction. And then we said, well, if we're going to do something new in a brand new medium, why not make a ginormous prediction based on all the things that we know we have and what we believe to be true? And we're learning as we go along that our prediction is actually lining up. Where our customers are using our product and discovering even the things that we didn't think they would discover, they're discovering inside of. Okay. And so it's just, we just need to survive. We just fundamentally believe in what we're making.
This seems like it could also be like a risky.
100%.
It is a risky.
100% risk. It's the craziest risk ever. You're basically like, I always say either I'll live in a ditch at the end of my life or I'll live in a nice house.
That's interesting.
So in all of this, of course, I've been talking about my co-founders because those are the people I'm most tight with because we work so closely together. And I should mention that we also have employees that are also doing significant...
I actually wanted to ask about that, and that's a good tangent there. So when you're building this product... And you're building this team because we talked about your founders and kind of how you built that relationship. But I'm also curious how you build a team, which kind of relates to the other question I asked about, like, if people want to pursue this, sometimes you'll have to hire people, and you just maybe got lucky with having the founders. So how do you
the founders themselves you have to work, never find a founder at a meetup on Friday night and make them a founder on Saturday. So, like, you have to spend time getting your founders figured out. You have to have a real honest, you got to be able to be in the room heart to heart in all levels, whatever that means to you. Right. When it comes to employees, first of all, really, it was I just talked to some developers and we did some subcontracting together and we learned how to work together. But what I want to say mostly about working with other people is that, of course, once you create something, you're also letting go of it. You're letting other people into it. Other people are creating code. Other people are creating art. Other people are giving perspectives. And it's totally inappropriate for me to not completely recognize that certain innovations that happen in our app are because one afternoon, Ryan decides he wants to work on some idea that he's excited about, and Lux, Rachel, and I are not in the office, and comes back and he says, let me show you this thing, and we're like, holy cow, that was so cool, right? Or, it happens with Thomas in our art, where we'll be working on something and suddenly he's like, I did some studying on how we're doing motion capture and we really got to change everything. And you're like, okay, thank you, because we were going down the wrong path. Or even someone like Tony, who's the new person that we brought on board. I'm realizing he's just one of those people who's just a deep problem solver. So if you don't have everyone working together, Fabio is the latest person we brought on board who's understanding the mechanics of business development and getting there really quickly. And so I'm realizing what happens is you have to give up control to people that are better than you. And in the beginning, you don't know necessarily who's better or not. And then that's more about a judge of character. So if you do not know somebody, if they're an A+ developer or whatever that everyone wants to call this stuff, right? If you don't know who they are and you want to bring them on board and you're nervous, the question you should ask yourself is not how good they are. The question is, am I going to be able to have an authentic connection with this person to be able to communicate ideas back and forth? Is there a way to have mutual respect? Is this person going to jive with the other people around you, right? And what happens is, even let's say you hire somebody who's not as proficient as you hoped, that person will bring you up to a certain level to understand that, and then suddenly, but the relationship is strong. Mm-hmm. And then if you have to hire someone who's more proficient later, because that's something you've learned from the first person you hired, you learned your capacity, right? Then that person, as long as you're working together in a real authentic way, will find their place when you hire other people too, right? So it's more about the communication and the person and the vibe and recognizing that you can work together with somebody than worrying about if I've got the hotshot artist or the hotshot developer, or that's just, it's more about you're going to be working with these people for a very, very long time. So you better like them or try to like each other. Try to respect each other.
Dan always mentions, and I've been a huge fan of kind of how Dan operates his business and how he hires people, is he hires people for fit. And then obviously they come with some level of skills, but it seems to me that he's putting focus into those people.
Yeah.
And then, you can teach someone to do a job.
Yeah. Hire for fit. I feel like that's, and so if you're starting a company, it's really about, are the people around you share similar values? Are your skills distributed properly? In the beginning, you're all going to be doing a bunch of things anyway.
So, typically I would ask, like, what would the, future of kind of your company look like? But it might be more set in stone because you are working on this, passion project that you mentioned you all believe in. So is there kind of an unknown there?
Oh, there's lots of unknowns. There's lots of unknowns. I mean, we're not building this thing as if we know how to get from A to Z. What we do though is we know where Z is. Mm-hmm. Z is A to Z. Sorry, all you other Canadians. Too much American TV. But we're looking out and saying we know what direction we're moving at. And if you don't know what direction you're moving at, then you're not walking in any direction. So we know we're walking in the direction. But at the same time, we're listening and looking and making sure that we're hearing what the people, our customers, our users are saying about our product. And then we're asking deeper questions. If we want to sustain ourselves and if this is going to be something, then we need to have people liking it. So then the path moves a little this way, right? Mm-hmm. But fundamentally, we're still knowing that we're kind of still heading here. And so maybe the path moves this way, and maybe it moves a little bit this way. But you need to have that. So you don't have that, then how do you build a company?
Right.
And then when you get there, it's going to look different than when you originally thought. But you'll get there, because you're going there. You might get there and you might be alone, and you're like, okay, that was a very useless path. But I think it's better than... there was a time when we were getting a lot of advice from a lot of different advisors and a lot of different venture capitalists and a lot of bit of business people, and you get pressure to kind of start switching your direction because you start flipping it all over the place, and you start pitching your company in 25 different ways, and you stop and then stop. Where were we going? We're going there. Okay, well then all this stuff doesn't even matter anymore, right? So that's another thing if you're going to do something. Even if it's not 20 years out or 5 years out or 20, if it's 6 months out, at least know where you're going in those 6 months.
And this has been kind of a learning process.
Yeah, it's really hard. And some people get it right away. I am so envious of people who get it right away. Some people just I know I'm doing this, we're going to go that way. I'm just great. Some people it takes longer. And so I'm learning along the way just like everybody else.
What do you think on a kind of industry-wide scale locally, because you've kind of been involved for a period of time, so how do you look at where things have been and kind of where they're headed? Both for the community
I think things are cool happening. Cool things are happening in Winnipeg. Mm-hmm. Cooler things are happening all the time. Yeah.
Where do you think it's gonna how things will grow? Because from my perspective, I'm pretty ingrained in the community, and things seem to be growing. There's more people registering.
Yeah.
do you see that kind of translating to the industry? Has it already translated?
Sure. Yeah, of course. I think like it's getting easier and easier to start up, like even just like an agency or an interactive marketing company or whatever, like whatever the way you're trying to make money. So that, and there's more and more people using Unity or Unreal or whatever Game Maker Pro or whatever they're using. And more people are making stuff, right? There's bigger companies coming in, training up people as well. There's more interactive companies like Bitspace and Flipside and Complex, and it goes on and on and on and on, right? So that's all happening. And so I really just think this is natural growth. And if you think about Winnipeg, Winnipeg is still an inexpensive place to live. So if you're an artist and you're thinking about wanting to start something like this, it would be a good place to start. I would like actually to see more of that stuff, people coming here to see that Winnipeg is a place to like create your indie company, because you can find, you know, really nice kind of warehousey space in the Exchange District or around here, or there's other places too, and you can pay inexpensive rent, and you can, you know, and you can suffer through the winter, which is the best part of creating because you don't want to go outside. So you have legitimately an excuse for 6 months of the year not to go outside, so you can literally be working on the things. Don't crunch. Remember, don't crunch. So, like, I think Winnipeg's got a million little things going for it, and I think that things are happening at a larger level, things are happening at an intermediate level, things are happening at the bottom. The high schools are getting excited about it.
Right.
So, it would be nice if, I think, the rest of kind of Manitoba and some elements of Winnipeg could look inward and see kind of this, you know, this beautifully growing community that's happening here. You know, sometimes I don't think people know how cool the Winnipeg is. You know, I
would agree with that. I think there's a lot of people that don't know, like, that game jams are happening, particularly students. Like, I see new people coming all the time, and I hear of new people that didn't get an opportunity to come that, you know, now they want to come next time. So, I think my perception at least is that there's a lot of desire and it seems like, maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a lot of people that want to pursue this industry, but maybe there's less opportunity to do that, even though it's growing, because there's like a lot of students that come out of school.
Yeah, I mean, it's very competitive. It's still very competitive. I think that certain areas, I mean, I think it's very difficult. The hard part is it's difficult for educators, like education for schools to like react to the speed at which industry changes. And I understand that. Like, that's tough. So, like, you know, we have certain programs that bring out certain types of, you know, artists or digital media people that are great, and they need to also continually adapt, right? And so that is hard. I don't know. Schools almost have to get into like this agile adaptation process as industry grows, because industry is growing fast, and so they're not, and there's certain skills that are oversaturated and super skills that are undersaturated. So like technical artists, for example, people who actually understand what a shader is, maybe some shader code, or even just people who are really great at like lighting and Unity and game engine lighting and understand how to like properly optimize for textures and mobile, and like that's a very technical skill. There's not enough of those people around, right? It ends up being that the industry has a certain kind of level of what you can do, and then depending on what your skills are, you might be in a place where there's too many people vying for 3 jobs, and there might be a place where there's like 10 jobs and there's only 2 people.
Right.
So that's a hard part.
What do you think your kind of personal growth will look like? Because we were talking about the industry. I'm curious what your personal goals are.
That's a hard one, because sometimes you sacrifice those for growth of a company. I think what'll happen is my heart's in content. It always has been in content. So I think what will happen eventually is that there'll be more responsibility around running the company will be brought into more executive type people eventually that kind of do that kind of thing. And I think I'll be more into being a producer and making VR content or XR content with partners. And then I would like to get into maybe directing again and maybe producing, maybe coming up with ideas. I love the idea of maybe making some game shows and writing some game shows and creating them in VR and getting into that idea. So those are my career goals, I think. My career goals is just to continue to explore the medium. Like fundamentally, I want to just continue to go deeper into virtual reality because I feel like that's something that when I tried it, it was something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. It was an actual moment where I'm like, I will never do anything but VR for the rest of my life. And I still feel that way, and it's been...
That's awesome.
6-7 years. Yeah.
I feel that this is maybe a weird comparison, but I feel that way about my cat.
Interesting.
Cause when I got her, it was a bit of a novelty, and and almost every single day, I think to myself, be like, I feel this. I always thought it was going to go away a bit. Yeah. Or I would still care about her, but I feel literally the same
about your cat. This day one to day now.
It's an odd comparison.
That's a fun comparison, though, but that's kind of the same thing. Yeah. Where it's like, when it struck a chord, it struck a chord, you know? And when that does it, you just can't fight it. So that's that. So even in my personal time, when I go home, I still work on VR projects, like my own personal VR projects, because I like VR. Like, it's not like I don't like VR. I love VR, right? I love making VR. Right? I love making VR because it's also like... it's still in the early days, and you can discover things. You can do new stuff. You can try stuff out. You can play with ideas. Like, you know what's a cool idea? I know people talk about this a lot when they do VR, and playing with the idea of scale, right? Mm-hmm. Such a simple idea, right? It's like, make yourself a giant, make yourself a tiny little ant, and you can do that in VR, right? Which is super compelling and ridiculously fun. But I was thinking the other day, when you're a giant, and I was noticing when I throw things as a giant, everything feels like slow motion. And I'm like, when I asked one of our developers, and I said, is there something wrong with how physics is working in VR? Like, why is it slow? And then he answered the most obvious question in the world, and I'm like, why didn't I think of that? It's like, because when you're a giant, 9.8 meters per second that's about this far.
Right.
If that takes a second, that's going to be slow, right? And then I thought to myself, how many types of jobs do you get to have where you get to simulate what it's like to be a giant and to actually experience what the physics would be like? And then I feel super privileged that I got to just experience the world from a new perspective. So for me, it's things like that. That's why it's like I get to, as a maker in virtual reality, I get to try all the things that it can do, and then you get to experience them, and then that actually gives me a more rounded perspective of the real world. And so it's like, that is where it goes all the way down to more like play. It's more about play. Fundamentally, I want to just play all the time. The reason why I need to learn all the real life skills is so that I'm not always playing. But fundamentally, that's what VR has let me do. It's let me play with ideas. And I know that's a crazy rabbit hole I'm going down, but it's more than just a medium. It's something more deeper for me, and I don't know why. It just struck the chord. So I'll be doing that for the rest of my life, and I want to learn music. I want to learn how to make some music. I want to make cheesy synthesizer music. This is a thing that I really want to do. And learn more about myself, learn more about my mind.
So when we kind of take into consideration the whole journey, obviously there's like a million kind of things that happen along the way, but how would you summarize the things that you've learned getting from like A to B to where you are now?
How would I summarize it?
Or what are the most important things that you've learned? Like, what are the...
I mean, that's a ginormous question.
Yeah.
I mean...
Intentionally so.
But, I mean... well...
Or even mentors,
Here's... I'll work backwards, because I can talk the more recent things.
Yeah.
You have to have patience. So, when a picture pops in your head, it takes a microsecond. That microsecond may take 2 years to develop. So you have to have patience to watch up something grow into something. And if you don't have patience, you will annoy everyone along the way. So work on patience.
I think that's kind of, I think that's, as simple as you could put it, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, kind of. So, in closing a bit here, like, there's an infinite amount of things that you could talk about with, like, anyone. There's so many different facets of people that we don't get a chance to get into. But to kind of summarize, I like to pose this question.
Okay.
Because I find how your perspective leads to maybe a different answer. So, if you were to arrive at the hypothetical golden gates, as it were, and you reach your creator,
Mm-hmm.
what would you like to have been said about your life?
I think this is, these are fun. These are fun questions. So
Yeah.
Thank you for throwing the fun, weird question out there. But I guess I would want, it would be like, when I was able, I chose the more interesting path.
Mm-hmm. That's fair, yeah. I guess with that, I wanted to think. I don't know how to segue. It's funny. I always ask that question, and I guess I wasn't prepared to kind of respond to it. But I'm really excited for people to listen to this, because I feel like you have a perspective that you can share that other people don't, and they can maybe learn from it. So I want to thank you for kind of sharing that with me. And then hopefully if people are listening, they can kind of take away something from it, and maybe they can even reach out to you and
Sure.
Things along those lines. What's the best way for people if they want to?
So you should, first of all, follow Flipside XR on Twitter and Flipside XR on Facebook. And you can reach me at Lesley, Lesley, at flipsidexr.com. And we're also on Instagram as FlipsideXR. So
Consistency.
just remember one thing and follow all of those things. Then you can email me. And I hope. Thank you for inviting me on to the podcast. I had a lot of fun just kind of blurting things out of my mind in the moment.
Yeah.
So hopefully that ends up working out. So thanks a lot.
Cool. And again, with that, I want to kind of throw out a few thanks here. Dan from BitSpace, we're kind of recording in his studio right now, and most of the equipment I'm using is his. So that kind of goes a long ways. When I started the podcast, Daniel Bergman volunteered his time to kind of edit, which is a very time-consuming, very arduous process. So I will always be grateful for him, whether he continues to be involved or not. And then, the awesome conversations that I've been able to have with people, yourself included. Everyone is unique. I super appreciate getting an opportunity to kind of cut through the thing that we're most known for and actually get to know the person behind that. If you want to subscribe, go to interactiveindie.com and you can, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're pretty much on every major podcast platform, and let's just grow together and learn more about each other and make this community even more awesome than it already is. Yeah.
Cool.